Hello and welcome to the Right Around the Murray Festival. I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people, elders, the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to their people, both past and present, and extend that respect to other First Nations people who are here today. My name is Gina Perry and I'm the author of non-fiction and fiction, and I'm thrilled today to be talking to these two writers about their powerful and moving stories. We will be talking together for the next little while, but please remember we should have time at the end for questions, so keep them tucked away. Firstly, let me introduce our writers today. Debra Dank is a Gundungji and Wakaja woman, a lifelong educator and teacher. Debra grew up in far west Queensland in the 1950s and 60s. Her debut book, We Come With This Place, was shortlisted for the Stella Prize and won a record-breaking 4 awards at the 2023 New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards. She won the Indigenous Writers Prize, the Douglas Stewart Prize for Non-Fiction, the UTS Glenda Adams Award for New Writing, and the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award Book of the Year. The book also won the prestigious Australian Literature Society for an gold medal for an outstanding literary work in 2023. We Come With This Place weaves the beauty and wonder of a rural childhood with the pain and dispossession that Debra, her people and her country have faced over generations. Welcome, Debra.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you.
Our second guest is Kathryn Heyman, and I'm going to read Kathryn's bio from my phone. Kathryn Heyman is the author of 6 novels, including Storm and Grace and Captain Starlight's Apprentice, which was serialised on BBC Radio to an audience of 2 million and published last year in a new edition. Her previous work has won the Wingate Award, Southern Arts Prize and Arts Council of England Award in the UK, and been nominated for awards including the Scottish Writer of the Year, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Edinburgh Fringe Critics Award, the Kibble Prize and the West Australian Premier's Literary Awards. Kathryn taught poetry and writing at the University of Oxford and is the director of the Australian Writers Mentoring Program. She won the Copyright Agency Author Fellowship for her 2021 memoir, Fury, which was one of The Guardian's 25 best books of the year. Fury was nominated for the Folio Prize, shortlisted for the Adelaide Festival Awards for Literature, and is currently in development as a feature film. Welcome, Kathryn. So what I thought we would do to begin with is I would ask both writers, one by one, to describe your book to someone who hasn't heard of it before, who might be looking at it in a bookshop or taking it off the shelf at a library, and then to do a short reading from a section that you feel encapsulates the spirit of the book. So would you like to start, Debra?
Sure, thank you. I'd like to just offer my respect to the Wiradjuri country that we're on, and thank you for coming along, and how amazingly exciting and privileged I am to be with you both. It's just very exciting. My book kind of happened by accident because I didn't set out to write a book. I have no sense of myself as a writer or as an author. I've always been a consumer of literature. I am an amazing snob around literature. I will own that. And, you know, my children always say, yeah, so Mum, it's like literature, is it? You know, I think. So I would describe this absolutely as a creative non-fiction because it was not ever planned or developed to be or to fit within any of the literary genres. And it is my work at the moment to extend the boundaries of genre, to include and to develop something that is, I suppose, more accepting of quite distinct Indigenous or Aboriginal voices. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from a story that some teaching from my son. My son was 5 years old, and we went out to a favourite fishing place, and he disappeared. And it's not so much of an issue, it's home, so, you know, we have this amazing about 800 square kilometres backyard, and my children grew up there, so. But I shall read a little piece. So, I stepped out of the troopy across tarps with water. I saw that Jubbinby was still in the back of the troopy, rummaging through the tucker box. "You not fishing then?" I asked. "Just want something to eat first, Mum. I'm hungry." "We just had breakfast, mate. Maybe you need some time for the food to hit your belly, hey?" "Nah, I'm hungry." "How about a drink of water? Maybe you need some water to wash your breakfast down." "Nah, I'm not thirsty. I'm hungry." "Well, there are sandwiches in the box." "Nah, don't like tomato." "There are cheese sandwiches in there." "Nah, don't want cheese." "There's fruit, an apple, an orange. Maybe they will be okay." "Nah, I want food, Mum. I'm hungry." "Well, I only have sandwiches of fruit. If you're that hungry, the river is there. Maybe you need to go catch a fish." We'll pass over a little bit. I'm sitting on the bank of the river with my line in the water. I look over to my sister. She glances to me. "What's the matter?" "Jubbinby. Where is he? Have you seen him?" Points to the troopy. I walk around the back of the troop carrier. I got up, took a better look, and I could smell wood smoke. Someone had lit a fire. I followed the smell away from the water to a stand of paperbark trees on the other side of the troopy. The fire was mostly burned down, but a few ends of burning snappy gum lingered, and it was all circled by a ring of carefully placed stones. Sitting at the stone boundary was Jubbinby. It hadn't been a large fire, and now there was a billy can of water fenced in by more snappy gum pieces, slowly glowing from ember to flame. 2 cooked black bream rested on some paper bark near the fire. It was the fresh, soft inner paper bark that we used for food. It was moist and didn't flake into dusty bits. If we used it for cooking, it gave a subtle flavour. It was medicine as well. That was like sipping on clean, scented air. The fish was cooked and exposed, white flesh through the crisp charcoal skin. "What are you doing?" "I just cooked my fish because I'm hungry." "So where did you get the fish? Did Mimi give them to you?" "No, I caught them with my line." "Oh, well, I was hungry. You said to catch a fish." So he sat there. He started taking his shoes off. "Don't take your shoes off, mate. There are too many bindi eyes." "It's okay, Mum. My feet need to breathe. They need to stretch for a bit. I'll put them back on soon." "What do you mean, breathe and stretch a bit? You're going to get sore feet. Put your shoes back on." My son looked at me with an aged sadness in his eyes, and I saw the knowledge of many lived lives and profound experience. "Mum, my feet know this place. They just need to get out of the shoes. You know they've grown here. They've walked everywhere on this country, and if I let them out of the shoes for a bit, they'll be happy. They'll be able to breathe. You know they are not my feet." "Whose feet are they, mate?" "I'm borrowing them, Mum. They belong to this place because this is where they've walked for a long time. This is where they've grown. The bindi eyes don't matter. My feet have felt all these things before. They've walked with my grandfather. They've walked with your grandfather. and lots of grandfathers before us mob. They know this place. These feet don't belong to me. They've grown here.
A bit longer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh dear.
Deb.
Sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
a sook, I'm sorry.
Me too. So this is a disaster. We're just going to be weeping. Shouldn't have worn mascara for a start.
Okay, so maybe we could just segue into Kathryn telling us, how would you describe your book to someone who'd never
Okay.
heard of it?
Let's just take a breath for a second, because I think we just need to, acknowledge that moment. So, Fury is the story of a year in my life as a young woman after a traumatic sexual assault trial, when I ran away from my life with the intention of making a different story, a story other than the one I had been born into, which was a story of quite extreme poverty and the manifold small and large indignities inflicted on the flesh of a girl. So I ran away from my life and I became a deckhand on a trawler in the Timor Sea during the worst season that the Gulf had known, with the most incompetent crew that the Gulf had ever known. And it transformed my life. So it's the story of the indignities that girls grow with. And it's the story of surviving poverty. And in particular, it's the story of being transformed by work, by wilderness, by nature, and by story. So, like Debra, I don't know, having been born into a family of both literal economic poverty and poverty of intellect and education, how I developed, but always had, snobbery about literature. I mean, where from? Like total snobbery, which now, I look back on and think, oh, you little upstart, honestly. So I'm going to read a little section when I have not long arrived on this boat after quite a lot of false starts and dangerous moments. Miss Pitt was my secondary school English teacher, long-legged, with a boy's haircut. She paced the length of the classroom, pointing, calling, demanding. When I finished school, she took me aside and said, "Casey, you have all the potential in the world. Don't waste it. Please don't." But by then, she had disappointed me by marrying a man, growing her hair into a blonde bob for the wedding, and turning into Mrs. Him after it. Before she disappeared herself into someone else's name, she introduced me to Slessor, to Hopkins, to the pleasures of speaking poetry aloud, to the thrill of the word. At night, I sat in the scrappy shed that served as my bedroom, with the mosquitoes buzzing on my skin, and I made my own heart pound by chanting poems, feeling myself taken elsewhere. Elsewhere, anywhere, but there in that dark and dank shed. I had not yet read Larkin, not come across his explanation that when removed from the familiar, you are perceived differently, and so you perceive yourself differently. But even then, I knew the possibilities of elsewhere, knew that if I got there, I could be different too. And now, orange disc crashing down, seabirds squeaking and skerecking. There I was, elsewhere. Better than the open road, I had the open sea. Hopkins, that was what I thought of then. His dappled vermilion gold burning amber birds, his thick painted world that had creaked my body and my longing open. At the stern of the boat, I stretched my arms out, turned my face to the horizon. sleek wavelets crimped around us, coated in red, in gold, so solid, so real, that I felt myself to be in a painting or a poem. Seabirds swooped and scooped on the shining surface of the sea, and there was nothing, no land, no boundary to be seen, just the ocean thief and the round circle of orange sun sitting fat on the horizon. And yes, I thought, yes, this is the story, the song that I have been waiting for, the one that is better than me. Carl, first mate, shouted behind me an instruction, and I tried to shake myself awake to remember that I was here to work, though I had no idea what work would look like. "Get the nets!" Carl grabbed at my arm, pointed me back towards the galley. "You and Davey can take starboard. When I call, shoot the nets out, use the rope. Here, I'll winch them down. You need to make sure nothing catches, yeah? Keep the nets clear." He pointed to the end of the berm. "We want them out so they can go wide. And the boards, see here? They need to be open when they drop to keep the weight in. Got it? Got it? Let's go." I didn't have it. Everything he had said rushed over me while I nodded in a panic and tried to make the words attached to some object. Nets, I could see, boards, winch. How badly wrong could it go? Carl raised his hand, nodded up at the skipper, and the grunt of the engine escalated, along with a new sound, the roar of the winch. Nets swayed over the aluminium tray with orange ropes tied at the ends, and while Carl shouted instructions, Davey and I yanked at the ropes, threw them out over the gunwale and shoved at them as the nets dropped in, each of us watching the other, nervous as unbroken horses. Water and sky merged, folding about us, and the ropes slipped into the water like snakes. They lay fat and hungry until the weight of the boards and the thrust of the boat combined to swallow them, disappearing like a gulp of food. The whole thing, the rise of excitement, the sudden rush, the dance of the nets on water, the swallowing of the sea, it all made light ripple through me. It was the ripple of possibility and of beauty. I was here, living it, being it. Fuck being on the road, being a cipher or a muse for the boy's own adventure. I was on the sea, and I was alive as I could ever hope to be. Fishing.
And Jubbanby is Carl.
Two fishing stories. Oh, is he on a trawler? Oh.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, I'm fascinated with both those extracts, so powerful and so representative of the writing, the books themselves. So I really was, one of the main questions that occurred to me when I was thinking about this interview was if you can tell me the origins of your books. I know you mentioned, Debra, that you'd never thought of yourself as a writer, which surprised me because in the book you describe yourself as an extremely curious, sometimes too curious, observant child who occasionally your curiosity gets battered away by people who actually don't want to reveal any more information, but you are very astute. So can you tell us, I know this book began as part of a PhD, but how it developed into the book that we have here today?
Sure. Yeah, as you heard in the introduction, I've been a teacher for a long time, almost 40 years. And as a teacher, I've always stood in front of classrooms and I've seen the struggle that Aboriginal children experience. I've seen the struggle that some amazingly hardworking colleagues have also experienced in trying to provide a really good and full education. And so I've always been interested in words and language, again, out of the curiosity. And why did words and language look and sound and feel different in different contexts? And so as someone who had grown with a dad who didn't have standard Australian English, who did not ever learn to read or write, and a mum who was very, very young, but on her scholarship examinations scored 100% for English, 100% for mathematics, and the third subject, geography, in her terms, failed abysmally. She only got 85%. You know, how awful is that? So these two incredibly different ideas around language and words and that communicative form. So I started to do the PhD just out of the curiosity around why this thing always happened, because I stood in front of classrooms and I saw what happened when I said things like, hey, look, take that essay out that we wrote yesterday. Remembering that yesterday I said, look, we're going to write a story. And the Aboriginal kids always just took a tiny little bit longer. And I taught all of those, you know, the synonyms, we did all of that. So my research kind of led me to understand that semiotics is a very real construct and something that impacts this space for Aboriginal people. And the semiotic system that exists for how Aboriginal people utilise English language vocabulary is very different to how someone who has English as a first language utilises that. So that's where the book grew from, and I was going to write 90,000 words on theory. But an incredibly wise woman, my supervisor, said, maybe you need to include a few stories, some of those narratives that you could use then to illustrate how that semiotic change occurs and where it happens. So this is almost identical to what I produced for the PhD. I didn't do a lot of rework for this. So it's... that's it. And it was important that they just be the normal, everyday stories that existed within and across my community. So, yeah.
But there's the power of your own story interwoven with the community story.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting idea, Gina, because I come from a collectivist culture. So the idea of an individual representation is really, really foreign, and I struggle with that. In fact, last night, somebody, I said, I cringe when I hear this described as a memoir, because that seems to be such an individualist kind of production. And I cringe because I don't want to cause my family the embarrassment of me sidelining their very significant contributions. So, it was a strange journey, I think, wholly and solely because I hadn't actually set out to produce this thing here, which is taking me on this amazing little journey.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I'm so grateful for your PhD.
Yeah.
What about you, Kathryn?
Well, very different, and also I can see, commonalities there. So I always knew that I would write about the Ocean Thief, which was the name of the boat that I was on, which I did return to, but I might talk about that in a bit. It is, the name The Ocean Thief is just a gift for a writer.
Yes.
When I went out on that boat as a young 20-year-old, I knew that I wanted to be a writer, but unlike you, it was all I wanted, but I had no idea how one would go about that. I'd never met, I'd barely met anyone middle class, let alone anyone who was a writer. So I had no idea how I would do it, but that was kind of my intention. And then I had this kind of extreme, this series of extreme events on this boat, these extreme transformative events. And it was too big for my language. So I knew it would be a story. I knew I would write it, but I didn't know how. So it took me really 30 years, both to have the psychological steadiness, to be self-revealing in this particular way, and to have both the kind of psychological steadiness and the kind of I don't think Australians are very good at talking about and admitting to poverty. So in particular, to have the capacity to know what I was dealing with, to know what my materials were, and to have the craft skills, to have the language for it. I could not have written this, 20 years ago, or possibly even 10 years earlier. So I thought for a long time it would be a novel. And I didn't know how the pieces fit together. So I would tell my partner every now and then sort of random stories that were just sort of cracking stories, and sometimes hilarious ones of being on the boat. And every now and then he'd say, hang on, tell me again about this French engineer who told you couldn't cook and he was going to be the cook. So just how did that work? And wait a minute, so when that thing happened, how did you. And then one day he said to me, what I don't understand is how you got on, like why you were there. And I thought, I've never revealed or understood the inciting incident in story terms. I've never understood why my own inciting incident, which was this sexual assault trial. So once that happened, then I was able to go, it's not a novel. It's not a novel.
So it was a process of making sense of that period in your life. Is that
It wasn't just of making sense of the period. That was part of it, but it was literally having the craft skills, actually having the language, finding the capacity both personally and in terms of, one of the things that readers and critics have commented on is the fact that Fury reads like a novel, because by the time I wrote it, I had written 6 novels and 12 plays, so I had a sense of how to put those things together. What that meant for me was that became a safe framework. So that was my PhD. It wasn't actually my PhD, which was a different novel, but it was my kind of the framework that allowed me to play and to find the story. I could have a kind of container for it, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. That's great. And my follow-up question to that was, and I've got a related one for you, Debra, is that your memoir involves speaking about things or allowing things to emerge that have been buried or hidden, and things that you at the time didn't know yourself until you got on that boat. How important was the writing for you in overcoming feelings of shame?
Well, I would say that I could not have written this if I still had feelings of shame. The work, the actual, this is partly a book about dumping shame, about removing shame and choosing to be done with it. So, yeah, I think that the image of trawling, which is, on fishing boats, you are literally trawling up mud and silt. It's not great environmentally, just as an aside. And so that as a metaphor for the trawling up of memories of things that I had not forgotten, but I had chosen. Hello, I'm Kathryn Heyman. I'm a professor, actually, and I work with words.
And I have chosen.
I have chosen to work with words. I've completely lost my frame there. But yeah, the not forgetting, but the trying not to attend to, which for a lot of us is how we live, right? I know that, but I'm just going to keep my attention here. And sometimes, that's actually really important. And that helps us survive. We don't always need to be torn open and pouring our innards all over the world, although, we can sometimes feel that there's an obligation to. So for me, that period of being in what appeared to be a very dangerous situation, for someone who had gone through a lot of, indignities upon the female flesh, let's just put it like that. A lot of, there was sexual assault, plural, and trauma attached to that. So to be on a boat with 4 men who were strangers looks like a dangerous situation. But actually, for one reason, it was a very safe situation. The reason was nothing to do with what I did. Spoiler alert, entirely to do with what the men did or didn't do. So that meant that actually, because I was safe and isolated, I was able to remember and to re-story myself and to change my language about myself and about my story. And that was the thing that was transformative. And that's what I wanted to, that's my kind of, the thing I want to put in the world.
Yeah. Thank you. And Debra, we come from this place, is all about storytelling. And you call your book a strange kind of letter. And that another point you make is that pain keeps the words away, and letting words free will help heal pain. Can you tell us some more about that?
It's a really strange kind of, what Kathryn's just shared with us. This process, I think, I put together stories because those of us who've written a PhD, we know that if we're lucky, we'll get maybe 3 or 4 readers of our PhD. I have 3 kids and a hubby, so I was almost guaranteed 4 readers, right? So I had my arguments lined up to get them to read the jolly PhD. So I was cognizant of including things that were important for my kids to remember. And they were important for them to remember to be able to retain their identity as Gurindji Wakaya people. Because our country is being fracked, our country is on the Beetaloo. And I think the motivation, it became even more, and the pain became more real when I witnessed the response to my daughter and my aunt participating in a Senate inquiry in the Northern Territory around fracking on the Beetaloo. A non-Aboriginal senator who looked at my daughter sitting there with my aunt beside her, my beautiful aunt who has maybe 50 words of English but speaks at least 5 full languages and as many dialects again. My daughter who was representing her, and the senator said to her, "I don't see that you are an Aboriginal. You do not have the right. I don't see that you have the right." And I thought the violation of not just Teek's sense of woman, Gurindji, Nimarinki, responsible cultural boss, responsible representative of her grandmother. That woman who said that had no idea of the depth of pain, but how that pain then went back to country and how that pain will continue to live there. So this relationship and the connection, the formality around all of those sorts of things really it exposes and it impacts the pain, but in the gentleness of country and in the hospitality of country, it's the way that we can manage it as well. So it's all about our place, this place, and our very real fear right now. We need help. If you're not doing anything, ring and have a chat with some politicians, please, because it is going to affect everybody if they frack the Beetaloo, because all of our water is going to be
even the language in that. No. What I was thinking, because weirdly, I started a PhD a billion years ago in the formation, in the way language impacts on how we think and how the landscape forms our language. I couldn't finish it. Couldn't do it. But what I was thinking when you were listening was the language that does or compounds that damage, I do not see. It's a closed statement and a bombarding statement. That language can do the work of opening and possibility, or it can do the work of closing and damaging.
Exactly. A really good example is, just think right now, home. What's the image in your head? So for non-Aboriginal folk, it typically might be 4 walls and a roof. For a lot of Aboriginal folk, it's a landscape, it's a geographic landscape. And that's all great and wonderful and good, and they're all very valid. But the problem arises when the policymakers and those who have the authority and the control assume that this is what home looks like, and this is what we aspire to be home.
Yeah.
So, the power around language and its use.
Yeah.
Which absolutely reinforces the power of stories, power of your book in really putting that together, because I think you said last night, this is not your story, it's our story, and we have to own those concepts of home, recognise that's so powerful.
It's a really, I think I'm sort of hogging the conversation at the moment.
I
so I'll
don't
just
think
say
Kathryn will let you hog.
Thank you. I have been teaching pre-service teacher education on and off for about 30 years. And one of the subjects that I teach is Aboriginal history. Aboriginal history. I teach about the genocide, I teach about the massacres, I teach about the stolen generation, I teach about all of these sorts of things. Aboriginal people didn't massacre, Aboriginal people didn't take the children. Why do we have this separate conversation? Why do we have a separate conversation? Because the longer we continue to have that separate conversation, the longer it's going to take for us to actually get on and be the country of people that we truly could be. And I believe that we can be. I think Australia and Australians are truly amazing people. But I think you hit the nail on the head. We're not really good about talking about some of those big issues, some of those really big, hurtful ideas and concepts and events. I think we might not be as tough as we imagine ourselves to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's human too, but that kind of sense of you have a choice, that pain is there. And that is a human story, and in Australia, it's vibrating. You can feel it wherever you are. And we have a choice of whether we, it can feel better temporarily, can't it, to go, I lived in Britain for a very long time, and I lived in Oxford. And in Oxford, you say, I'm not going to make a fuss. In fact, my British publishers, when I first said I was going to call Fury Fury, my British publishers said, we're just a bit concerned that it might put people off. And my husband, who comes a bit from that world, said, why don't you say that you're going to call it, I was a little bit annoyed, but I wasn't going to make a fuss. And I thought, because they will call it that, they will believe it.
Right.
So I think we have that choice, and it can feel like it's better. But it's not better, because you're not healed, you're not solved, you're just brittle and shallow and pretending. So yes, we're in this moment right now where we have a choice about what we do with that. That's a different panel.
We need a whole lot more time.
And I'm going to just jumping off that point you made about, one of the questions I had was about title. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about, I know you just said then that Fury was the book. Fury was the title you suggested or wanted to give to your publisher. Was there alternative titles canvassed at some point?
There were. When I wrote the book, for a long time I didn't quite know what it was going to be, and for a long time it was just called Girl, and that was a response to Roald Dahl's Boy. It was a kind of sense of part of what the book is about these kind of men's stories, men's own stories, boys' own adventures that were kind of, I grew up believing, well, that's what the story is, that's what adventure is, it has to be boys' own. So it was kind of a response to that, but of course, you know, by the time I'd realised it was actually going to be this particular book, we had girls in bags, girls in shoes, headless girls, the girl with the something, the girl who's gone away, the girl who's... And it was just, the girl had well and truly jumped the shark. So that wasn't going to work. And I had a sort of couple, but I couldn't quite land on anything. And my publisher didn't love any of them. And when I was a kid, one of my nicknames, when I was an angry sort of kindy kid, I had a habit of biting people. And I remember, and I write about this, I remember the pleasure of being kind of cute and pigtailed, and when older kids were mean to me or spoke about me in a way I didn't like, I would bite them and leave marks. Clearly, in need of some, kid therapy. But I received 2 nicknames, Little Cannibal and Little Fury. And I thought they were both compliments.
Same.
I was proud of them.
Yeah, sounds good.
So Fury, there was just a moment that I was like, oh, Fury. That's what it is. Yeah. And your title I
Debra?
love so very much.
And there's lots of connotations too in your title. Would you like to talk a little bit more about the idea of place in the title?
It, I suppose if there's something that non-Aboriginal Australians know about Aboriginal Australians, it's, that connection to country. And so the struggle that we have had, because there's this image that Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory are so relatively more supported or more able to maintain culture and all of those sorts of things. But the struggles and the fights that we engage with are constant, and they are vile and they are wicked. And they are corrupt, and I use that word intentfully. And so, it's always because I was so happy, just going and teaching maths and English at high school, and then going off teaching something at uni, and then I'd want to change and I'd go back to primary school, I'd go bush or whatever. But then people started to pick on my kids. It's like, and you're picking on my kids by taking their country off them. And when I talk about my kids, I'm not talking about the 3 that I have birthed. I'm talking about Gurenji Wakaya kids. I'm talking about the local kids here. I'm talking about the kids over in the Pilbara. They are my kids, because I am an Australian grandma, and if a grandmother cannot be responsible and fight for her kids, who the jolly well will, So we have to understand that what we are doing today, all of us, what we are doing today to place, we are denying our children their future. Absolutely and utterly. And we do not ever have that right. And we should be ashamed. That's my Scottish Methodist.
Yeah. I'm married to a Methodist. We've got so many stories. We go on forever. But I just want to say one more thing about Fury, which is that Fury is not rage, which is uncontrolled. Fury is controlled. It is sharp, It is powerful and focused, and we should all be in a state of fury in Australia right now. That doesn't mean we can't also be joyous. Joy is a frickin' touchstone for me. You could do nothing without joy. But we should not be complacent right now. Not about poverty, not about Indigenous rights. I mean, hello, I work with words. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'm really conscious of time. We've got about 9 minutes left, so we can have questions or we can keep going. What would you like to do?
I think if people have, if you have a question, give us an indication, and then we can make a call. You know, yeah, I can see some hands up.
Sally's got.
Sorry, I don't mean to take over.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just thinking about the theme of WAM, of living, breathing stories, and I wondered if each of you could riff on that theme and how it applies to your particular work.
Living, breathing stories and how that applies to your own
The
book.
theme of living, breathing
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Want to jump in?
I always talk about since the dreaming. Western science likes to say about 60,000 years. I don't sort of tend to quantify. It's everywhere in this place. You know, there are stories. It just leaves me confounded that we don't have a better relationship with the country. All of us. You know, have a look out there. It's magnificent. Why are we not in a state of fury around the dozing of trees like this? And I'm no tree hugger, let's just be, because I love...
Tree hugger.
Are you? Don't worry about Kathryn. She's fury, right?
Furious tree hugger.
You know, I love a hot shower. So I'm very pragmatic around the need for some kind of copper piping. But we have to be a lot smarter, and we are a lot smarter. But we have to stop being complacent and complicit. We can't be so passive about, you know, the government policy. We are the people who enact that policy.
And I would say all of that starts with story.
Yep.
Everything we do is story. Every decision we make, you know, when the things we buy, our actions are a result of story. So I think I'm a bit of a fundamentalist about this, actually.
Yeah.
That, you know, I do, partly because my personal experience, truthfully, was that the life I made, which is a pretty great one, no offence. You know, I made a life that was that bore no relation to the life that was promised me. And I did that with no other skills than my imagination, than story, the understanding of story. And I don't mean and then I'll find a witch and there will be a happy ending. I mean understanding what story is for, understanding the power of it, and understanding the way that we can change our stories, the way we live, the stories we tell ourselves, both individually, in our family groupings, in our communities, and in our nation. We have a choice about that.
Yep.
So I don't know whether that answers your question.
Thank you.
Kathryn, I just want to say you chose the perfect title for your book, and also when you read it, you will feel furious. I had sections of it where I actually just felt that fury, and I wanted to strangle some people on your behalf, so it was really, really powerful. So I just want to say
Thank you for that. I hope you felt hopeful as well, because that's very much what I wanted is the same. But you don't get the good story. You don't get the light unless you actually tell the truth about the bleak. And, you know, without wanting to use a religious metaphor, but I'm going to, you know, you get resurrection. It's in nature, it's everywhere. You know, rebirth after death. So you've got to you got to be in that first. So I apologise for any uncomfortable feelings, because none of us like uncomfortable feelings. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that legal stuff hasn't really changed. Yeah. Yeah, no, the legal situation for sexual assault in cases is still pretty appalling, to be honest. Yeah. And actually, I did a panel with some lawyers, and there was a lot of, one of them was Louise Milligan, and the questions that were asked were about, how can we redo the law? What can we do? And, the lawyers, Louise and Susie, writer lawyers, were like, well, we could do this and make this slight change. And I was like, oh, we have to burn it down and actually begin again, because its structures are white, Oxford privilege. That's how our law is made. That's what it comes from Westminster. So, yeah, sorry, rant.
There's been a few.
It's just been a few.
Sorry. It's Gina's fault.
That's what I'm here for.
Hello. Hi. My question kind of jumps off what you were talking about, Kathryn, of the rebirthing. Can you recall when you were both writing your books a sense of a cathartic type of feeling? Can you recall, did you have that feeling? If you did, when did it come to you when you were writing?
What feeling was that? Sorry, I'm
Cathartic.
Cathartic feeling.
Oh, cathartic feeling.
I have thoughts about that, but can you talk about that?
It's a really interesting question, and this was posed to a panel that I was on somewhere else. And we had a Malaysian Chinese author and myself and another First Nations author from a different country. And we all looked at each other and we looked at each other, and my panel member, colleague down the end said, that is such a white question. Because we didn't have any sense of catharsis, within our writing, because it wasn't something that we needed to deal with or to let go of or any of that sort of thing. It was just simply this thing, the machine that is our life and our community. And we were all really, really joyful of all of those awful things and all of the poverty and all of that. The joy was in the actual journey and the company that walked with us through those things. So, there was no cathartic kind of experience, but just this, thank God that we get to do this.
I would just add that the word catharsis it's a Greek word, and it means that there's a build-up of such investment of feeling and then a release. So I would say that that's for me. I could not have written this particular book unless I had already had that catharsis. But what I want is for the catharsis to be for the reader, and later with the film for the viewer. I want that to be elsewhere, not for me. Which isn't to say that if you're writing early drafts that are, that kind of process of whoosh, oh, that feels good to get that out, that's great. I'm not at all critiquing that. But I would say just if you're writing something yourself and you want it to go to the wider world, let it sit for a bit and percolate so that it becomes a bit separate from that feeling. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
I'm a fan of the Greeks, so, not...
The Greek.
We really have to wrap it up. I'm very sorry to say. I really feel
13
like
seconds.
we've only just begun. I'd like to thank our guests, Debra Dank and Kathryn Heyman, for fascinating Thank you.
And thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Gina.
I'd love to thank the audience for being here today.
Thank you, guys.
There'll be book sales and signings outside in the library area. Other events with the current guests, if you want to see more of Kathryn and Debra. Kathryn is back in here at 10 a.m. on Sunday with a panel of authors sharing publishing insights, including tales from their first-time experiences.
How long ago?
Those of you who are booked into Stereo Stories tonight are in for a treat when Debra shares a story from her childhood.
There's no singing.
Complete with a backing band.
You can come.
And the next event in here is at 3:45, which is Prudish Nation, with Liz Duk Chong talking to Paul Delgado about his newly released non-fiction work about whether we are a nation of prudes when it comes to the landscape of diversity in relationships. You can still buy tickets for these events online or at the library's loans desk. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for being here, guys. And thank you. Thank you for that.